Her daughter-in-law called the necklace cheap in front of guests. With a smile, Margot Bennett, 76 and newly widowed, didn't flinch. Carmen posted a photo of it online, captioned, "Estate sale energy." By morning, a scanned receipt dated, signed, and hers was in every family inbox and Carmen's comment thread. She'd gifted with grace. Now she was gifting with precision, and when Carmen tried to delete the evidence, the archive link was already public. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Margot Dean had always wrapped presents the same way. Layered tissue, a folded linen ribbon, and a handwritten tag. No glitter, no hashtags, no QR-coded unboxing moment. Just care. And this one had weight. She rested the velvet box gently on Carmen's curated marble counter, right next to the pastel frosted cake and the stack of open gifts already arranged for tomorrow's Instagram story. Carmen didn't look up. She was filming a slow pan of a gifted designer bag. "Happy birthday, Carmen," Margot said with a smile, quiet but clear. Carmen blinked toward her. "Oh, thank you, Margot," she said, lips stretched just wide enough. She opened the box one-handed, her eyes darting to Eli, then back to the small necklace inside, a delicate gold chain, inset with a soft green tourmaline. Carmen lifted it by the clasp like it might be too fragile for her fingers. Or maybe just too old. Margot watched. Waited. No hug, no comment, just a quick nod before Carmen set it aside. Next to the empty cake stand, Hazel noticed. She always did. Later that night, when the crowd had thinned and the candles were just glimmers and wax puddles, Margot passed by the hallway toward the guest coat closet. She wasn't eavesdropping, not intentionally, but voices leak through open doorways, and this one stung sharper than any accidental cut. "She means well," Carmen said in a soft laugh whisper. "But her gifts are always so cheap." Margot froze in the hallway shadows, her hand still on the doorknob. Eli's voice followed, weary and low. "It's fine, babe. Don't take it personally. That's just Mom." The words fell like coins hitting an empty jar. That necklace had belonged to her mother, a woman who'd worn it to every church gathering, every job interview, every one of Margot's graduations. She hadn't just kept it for decades, she'd insured it, protected it, cleaned it twice a year with a soft cloth and memory. Margot didn't cry. She hadn't cried since the day Eli moved out and left behind the yellow quilt she made him. No, crying was emotional clutter. This was data, information, a shift. By the time she drove home under the warm Austin night, the cicadas humming like slow applause in the trees, Margot knew exactly what she was going to do. She poured herself a bourbon, neat, and climbed the stairs to her study. The air was still, the scent of cedar faint from the antique bookshelf by the door. She pulled the safe key from behind a framed family photo and opened the drawer where she'd tucked away old appraisals, deeds, and certificates in folders, so precisely labeled. Miss Levin used to joke she could teach the IRS a thing or two. It took less than a minute to find what she was looking for. Original appraisal certificate, Jeweler Whitmore & Sons, San Antonio, item 114K gold chain with green tourmaline stone. Estimated value $2,875. She ran her finger along the embossed corner, smiled without joy, and slipped the document into a fresh envelope. Then she pulled out 2 more sheets, one blank, one lined. For now she only needed the envelope. The bourbon glass was empty. The silence in her house felt different tonight. Not lonely, just sharpened. Her phone buzzed. A text from Joanne. "Well?" Margot typed slowly. She called it cheap. A pause. Then, "Want to remind her what cheap costs." Margot didn't answer right away. Instead, she set the envelope on the desk, placed the receipt beside it, and turned out the light. Downstairs, the antique clock struck midnight. She didn't mail the receipt tonight, but tomorrow was coming fast. The necklace hadn't always lived in a safe. For a brief stretch in the late 80s, It lived around Margot Dean's neck, worn like armor under crisp blouses and padded shoulder jackets, back when she ran Dean Interiors out of a converted garage with a rotary phone and a stubborn fax machine. It was summer when she bought it, 1987, sticky and mean, and the city felt like it was melting. Her mother had just passed, her marriage was straining, and she was pouring every dime she had into building something that might outlast the exhaustion. She'd walked past the Whitmore and Sons storefront every week, and that one day, on a dare to herself, she walked in. The jeweler had shown her several options, but the tourmaline stopped her heart for a beat, soft green like lake glass, imperfect, alive. It reminded her of her mother's voice when she hummed in the garden. $3,000, she'd asked, blinking. He nodded. It's an heirloom piece, ma'am. One day it'll matter more, because it mattered now. She bought it. A week later, Levin, then still trim and full of opinions, helped her draft the appraisal and insurance forms at her kitchen table. Most people think value starts at market, he'd said, tapping the paper, but it's actually about context. Who owned it? Why they kept it. He'd been with her ever since. Steady, professional, protective. Now, nearly 40 years later, Margot pressed a print copy of that same appraisal into the belly of a manila envelope. No return address, just a single recipient. Carmen Dean, care of the PR box listed in her profile bio, one Margot had quietly written down months ago. She sealed it, then repeated the process with a second envelope. This one addressed to Joanne. Different reasons. Same message. By 10 a.m. both were in the drop bin at the post office, tucked beneath the breathless hum of fluorescent lights and the clatter of tape guns. Margot didn't linger. She walked back to her car with the quiet finality of someone who had just pressed send on something that couldn't be undone. That afternoon, she poured herself an iced coffee and opened Carmen's profile out of morbid curiosity. A new post had gone up. So spoiled. My people get me. Couldn't feel more loved today. When? Birthday haul. Grateful heart. It was a carousel champagne bottles, blush-colored gift bags, tissue spilling like froth. The designer bag was front and center. A bracelet from a skincare brand, boxed macarons, even a handwritten card from a sponsorship manager, all tagged. The necklace? Nowhere in sight. Margot stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't feel rage. Not exactly, just emptiness. Like someone had painted over a mural she spent her whole life working on and called it minimalist art. Her phone buzzed. Joanne. It came. I nearly spit my tea. Margot smiled faintly. Another ping, framing it. Gonna hang it above my bourbon cart. She chuckled. Just once. Later that evening, the house creaked with its usual age. Margot was folding laundry when Hazel's message came through. Grandma, was that necklace really from you? Her fingers paused mid-fold over a towel. The words hit harder than expected. She sat on the edge of her bed, reread the message, then typed, yes. It was your great-grandma's first. Then mine. Now, well, I tried. A few minutes passed. Then Hazel replied, it's pretty. I saw it in the box. I liked it the best. Margot's eyes welled, but the tears stayed where they were, contained, like everything else. She placed her phone on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark. But sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. Not after that question, because if Hazel was asking now, others might start too, and Margot had kept everything. She measured teaspoons, not eyeballed them. She read full contracts, even the parts that made her eyes cross. And when it came to people, especially family, she rarely shut doors, she just stopped oiling the hinges. But that morning she opened Instagram, went to Carmen's profile, and tapped unfollow. No dramatic goodbye, no announcement, just a small silent act of subtraction. The kind Carmen might not notice immediately, but would feel eventually, like a draft through a closed window. Within 10 minutes her phone buzzed. Carmen, was that intentional? Margot stared at the message for a moment, then walked upstairs to her office. The morning light hit the edge of the desk just right, glowing across the paper like a spotlight. The appraisal certificate lay where she'd left it. Still crisp, still absolute. She snapped a photo, no filters, no cropping, and sent it back. Nothing else. No words. Her screen stayed quiet for several minutes. Then Joanne called. "Tell me you didn't just send her the holy document." Margot didn't sit. "I sent her a photo. You're going nuclear." Margot picked up the empty bourbon glass from last night and walked it to the sink. "No," she said. "I'm just going public." Joanne let out a low whistle. "She won't take this lying down. She'll take it how she takes everything. Superficially." They both paused. "You okay?" Joanne asked finally, softer now. "I will be," Margot replied, "sooner than she will." That afternoon, Margot logged into an old secondary Instagram account, one she'd made years ago for her book club but never really used. No profile picture, almost no followers. Perfect. She uploaded the photo of the appraisal, added a simple caption, "Value isn't always visible. Some things just need the right eyes." She scheduled it to post the following morning at 9:00 a.m., tagging no one, naming no names, letting implication do the heavy lifting. Then she turned off the phone, poured herself tea, and sat in the quiet. But peace was short-lived. By evening, Eli's name flashed across the screen. She debated letting it ring out, but answered anyway. "Hi, honey. What are you doing?" His voice was already tight. "Reading," she said simply. "I mean with Carmen. The photo. She's upset." "She's embarrassed," Margot corrected. "She's overwhelmed." Then maybe she shouldn't have said what she said. Eli exhaled hard. "Mom, this is spiraling. You're embarrassing her." There was a silence on the line. Margot leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the shadows stretch across the floor, like a warning. "She embarrassed herself," she said. "I just provided context. I get that you're hurt, but no," she interrupted, voice calm but knife clean. "You don't get it. You've never had to measure your worth against someone else's feed." Eli was quiet now. "Caught. I gave her something with soul," she said. "She treated it like clutter." "Mom, tell her I won't be engaging further. But that doesn't mean I'm not watching." She hung up. Outside, the Austin night hummed with sprinkler clicks and a distant siren. The air smelled like warm cement and wilting hydrangeas. Margot stood at the window, arms folded, gaze hard. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't stormed into Carmen's world. She'd simply unfollowed it, and then left breadcrumbs for the rest to do the same. The post had only been live for a few hours, but the tremors it sent through Carmen's curated corner of the internet were already beginning to ripple. It started slowly, one or two comments that might have gone unnoticed on any other day, under any other post. But this wasn't any post. It was her birthday highlight, the one she'd carefully constructed to signal elegance, desirability, and effortless affluence. The lighting had been checked, and double-checked, the gifts arranged by Brand Tier, and each caption crafted with the tone of someone both grateful and aspirational. But there, buried among the predictable heart emojis and fire symbols, came a question. Is that necklace a real heirloom or a vintage-style piece? She didn't reply. She almost never did. Replying was for influencers with time to spare and reputations to repair. But a few minutes later, a second comment appeared. Kind of odd that she didn't tag who gave her the necklace. Then, another, and another. By noon there were nearly 50 comments, all variations of the same curiosity. Where had the necklace come from? Why hadn't it been acknowledged? And was it possibly a knockoff? At first Carmen tried to ignore it. She told herself it would pass, the way minor algorithm flares always did. She brewed a lavender latte, and filmed a half-hearted story about protecting your peace, overlaying it with lo-fi music and the hashtag haters gonna hate. But the likes on the original post began stalling out. Worse, someone had clearly connected dots she hadn't even realized were visible. A modest but sharply followed fashion blogger named Layla March reposted the appraisal photo, the same one Margot had scheduled from her second account, and tagged it with a short, pointed caption, Heirloom flag. That alone might have slipped by unnoticed if Layla's followers weren't so obsessively curious about provenance and authenticity. They began commenting not just on Carmen's birthday post, but on older ones, linking screenshots and dissecting her previous claims of family heirlooms against the new evidence. Several noticed that Carmen had never once referenced a mother-in-law in years of content. A few wondered if that had been intentional. By early evening, Carmen had disabled comments altogether. Across town, Margot sat in her reading chair, the same one she'd had reupholstered twice in 30 years, sipping ginger tea while watching the spectacle unfold in real time. She didn't feel glee exactly, not the sugar rush of revenge some people fantasize about. No, what she felt was closer to confirmation, not vindication, but evidence, that the truth, once released, tends to gather weight all on its own. She rose slowly and moved to her office, where the sunlight filtered through plantation blinds, striping her desk with warm shadows. The printed appraisal certificate sat in its folder, but this time she removed it and laid it flat on the desk. Reaching for a pen, the fountain kind, with real ink she still ordered from a stationery shop in Baton Rouge, she pulled a clean note card from the drawer and wrote in clean, deliberate script, "Here's the cheap proof." She slid the card into a linen envelope, along with a fresh print of the appraisal, and sealed it without a second thought. She already had Carmen's PR box address written on a sticky note, folded neatly inside the front of her Rolodex. At the post office, she didn't wait in line for a receipt. She simply dropped the envelope into the secure drop slot and walked out with the same quiet purpose she'd walked in with. That night, while folding a fresh load of laundry, Margot's phone vibrated on the arm of the couch. It was Hazel. The message was short and unpolished. No punctuation, no emojis. "Mom's freaking out, what's going on?" Margot stared at it for a moment, folding a bath towel with precise corners. Then she replied, slowly tapping each word with care. "Sometimes people tell a story so long they forget who was in it. I'm just reminding her." She didn't hear back right away, but she didn't need to. What she knew, and what Carmen was now learning, was that the internet has an insatiable appetite for truth when dressed in silence and a paper trail. And Margot still had drawers full of both. The necklace was never meant to be worn every day. It was the kind of thing you kept for meaningful nights, family dinners, old friends coming to town, weddings where love still looked possible. That's why the boutique owner had recognized it instantly, even before she saw the name etched into the underside of the clasp. Margot D. Tiny, engraved in a jeweler's hand. Not flashy, intentional. It had been her request at the time, make it subtle but permanent. She got the call on a Thursday mid-morning. The boutique owner, a woman named Lizette, with a voice like silk-covered gravel, didn't waste time. "I believe I have something of yours," she said. "A tourmaline necklace, brought in yesterday afternoon by a woman named Carmen Dean." Margot paused, the tea kettle in her hand suddenly forgotten. "I beg your pardon." "She didn't mention you," Lizette continued, "but we inspect all vintage jewelry before listing it. The moment I saw the engraving, I knew exactly whose it was. You've bought from us before. You're in our system." Margot pressed her palm to the counter to steady herself. She tried to sell it. "I believe the words were decluttering sentimental junk," Lizette exhaled. "We declined the consignment, but I thought you'd want to come pick it up before anyone else got eyes on it." The drive across town was long and quiet. She didn't put on music. The summer sun spread out across the asphalt like it had nowhere better to be, and Margot kept her hands at 10 and 2, white-knuckling the steering wheel the entire way. Her chest buzzed, not with anger, not yet, but with the kind of cold disbelief that came only after being proven right in the worst possible way. When she walked into the boutique, the necklace was already waiting in a felt pouch behind the counter. Lizette handed it over gently, like she knew what it really was. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know this wasn't about resale value." "No," Margot replied, tucking it into her purse without looking. "It never was." She didn't cry in the car. She didn't scream or throw things or call Joanne. Not yet. She just drove home, pulled into her driveway and parked. Then she sat there, gripping the steering wheel long after the engine cut, staring at the reflection of her own eyes in the rearview mirror. Once inside, she walked upstairs, opened the small antique jewelry cabinet she hadn't touched in months, and placed the necklace inside. This time, she didn't bother with the velvet pouch. She left it bare, glinting in the soft light, and closed the drawer with a click. Later that evening, Margot dialed Eli. She expected voicemail. She didn't get it. "Hey, Mom," he answered, his voice cautious. "I heard you were trying to stir the pot again." She ignored the bait. "Did you know Carmen tried to sell the necklace?" A pause. "What?" "She took it to a consignment boutique, called it junk." "That has to be a mistake." She said she was decluttering. Margot replied, voice flat. "They found my name engraved inside the clasp." Another pause. "Okay, well, she probably just didn't realize what it was." "She knew," Margot said. "She just didn't care." Eli let out a shaky breath, and Margot could hear him struggling to find neutral ground, the kind he always reached for when conflict made him uncomfortable. "Look, I'll talk to her. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. I'm sure she didn't mean to." "She did." Margot cut him off. "You can excuse it however you want, Eli. But I gave her something that belonged to my mother. She pawned it like a prop." Silence again. This one longer, deep. Before he could fumble through more justifications, Margot ended the call. That night, she sat at her desk beneath the soft glow of a banker's lamp, pulled out a fresh sheet of stationery, and began to write. "Carmen, inheritance isn't an aesthetic, it isn't leverage, it isn't filtered. It's earned through care, through memory, through showing up. You haven't." Margot, she folded the letter, sealed it in a heavy cream envelope, and placed it beside the necklace's paperwork. Tomorrow, she would make it official. It started, as many things did in Margot's world, with someone from church, an old client, Louise Hightower, who once paid Margot in hand-painted china when her checkbook mysteriously disappeared, messaged her on Facebook with a single line, "Is that the tourmaline necklace I remember from your mother's funeral?" Margot hadn't posted anything direct. She hadn't tagged or called out. She simply uploaded a black and white photo of the necklace, not worn, just resting on a linen napkin, with a caption that read, "Some things carry stories you can't tag." She had expected quiet appreciation, maybe a few likes. Instead, her inbox began to bloom, not with strangers, but with women from another generation. Ones who remembered her showroom off Burnett Road, her meticulous eye for color pairings, the way she always sent handwritten thank you notes, no matter how small the transaction. They remembered the necklace too. One of them asked if she'd ever considered joining a vintage collectors group. "It's small," the woman said, "mostly local, but full of people who still believe things matter beyond their market value." By Thursday, Margot had joined. The group was modest, just over 500 members, but the conversations were rich, full of history, sentiment, and careful appraisal. She posted once, without commentary, "1987 Whitmore & Sons, 14K gold, with tourmaline, gifted from my mother, given to someone who didn't ask its story, returned without comment." "I'm keeping the story now." The reactions rolled in, shock, sympathy, disbelief. But underneath it all, a quiet reverence, the kind only people who'd watched time make things precious could give. Someone shared an old estate ring story. Another mentioned losing a brooch in a move and never recovering from it. They didn't need her to explain why she was hurt. They already knew. Somewhere between those exchanges, the post was quietly screenshotted and shared outside the group. One of Joanne's neighbors, a lifestyle blogger with a small following and very sharp instincts, reposted the image under the title, "When Legacy Meets Lip Gloss." The piece was subtle but cutting, painting a portrait of generational disconnect through implication alone. It didn't name Carmen. It didn't need to. The audience Carmen had worked so hard to impress had already begun whispering. Across town, Carmen's engagement rate had dropped 19% in 3 days. and Margot hadn't lifted a finger. That weekend, Hazel came to stay, a quiet overnight, while Eli and Carmen reorganized their content calendar, which Hazel explained with a hint of embarrassment. She curled up on Margot's couch with a bowl of popcorn and a pile of library books. But halfway through a chapter, she glanced up and said, "Do we have anything from Dad's childhood?" Margot blinked. "Like what?" "I dunno. Photos? Toys? Something he didn't throw away?" It was the kind of question that pressed against places Margot thought had long been boxed up. She stood slowly and walked to the hall closet, where a row of labeled tubs lined the top shelf like chapters in a life no one had read lately. She brought down two. Inside were faded Polaroids, a baseball mitt with a cracked leather strap, and a music box her ex-mother-in-law had mailed from Oregon the year Eli turned 7. At the bottom, in a cloth pouch, were two cufflinks from Margot's father. Heavy, masculine, not flashy. Hazel picked them up like they were holy. "Why don't we ever talk about this stuff?" Margot sat beside her, "Because most people only ask after it's gone." The next morning she hosted a brunch. Nothing showy, just quiche, mimosas, and lemon bars, cut into neat squares. Joanne came early to set the table, teasing Margot's perfectionism the whole time, while Hazel arranged photos on the buffet like she was curating a museum exhibit. By the time the first guest arrived, the necklace lay in its box, center stage, unannounced, next to a framed photo of Margot's mother wearing it in 1989, her hand resting on a typewriter. Guests didn't ask, they just looked. Afterward, while they cleaned up, Joanne leaned against the counter and watched Hazel carefully polish a picture frame with the sleeve of her sweater. "You're teaching legacy," she said, eyes on Margot. "She's chasing lighting." Margot didn't reply right away. Instead, she wrapped the leftover lemon bars in wax paper and slid them into Hazel's tote. The request came through a private message, simple, professional, and almost easy to ignore. The woman's name was Rachel Whitcomb, a freelance contributor for Inheritance Weekly, a digital magazine that blended human interest journalism with stories about family legacies, estate transitions, and the emotional scaffolding of wealth and memory. Rachel had seen the Facebook post, the one with the black and white necklace, and reached out not because of the drama, but because of the restraint. "Most people," she wrote, "try to go viral. Yours felt like a journal entry someone left open on purpose." Margot read the message twice before responding. She didn't want exposure. She wasn't seeking followers or retribution or the chaos that came with online spectacle. But something about Rachel's tone, neutral, almost reverent, felt different. So she replied with a single condition: "I'll tell the story, but I don't want my name on it." Rachel agreed without hesitation. They spoke the following afternoon, over the phone. Margot sat in her sunroom with a cup of Earl Grey, the doors cracked to let in the scent of lavender and a faint breeze. Rachel asked good questions, not nosy, but rooted in empathy. She asked about the necklace, yes, but also about Margot's mother, the way she'd worn it, why she'd chosen to keep it rather than wear it often. They talked about the difference between memory and memorabilia, about the quiet ache of being reduced to cheap by someone who never asked what something cost emotionally. They didn't speak Carmen's name. They didn't need to. The article went live 3 days later under the title, "The Things We Don't Post: A Story of Inheritance, Intention, and Invisible Worth." It was cleanly written, beautifully structured, part confession, part cultural critique. The narrative traced a woman's experience, giving away a family heirloom only to have it dismissed, sold, and eventually returned. It spoke about what happens when legacy runs into image culture, when sentimentality collides with performance. And while it never said the name Carmen Dean, it didn't have to. Within hours, people made the connection. The article trended in quiet places, etiquette forums, family finance blogs, women's legacy circles. On Reddit, a sub-thread titled, "She Really Called That Necklace Cheap," racked up comments dissecting Carmen's previous posts. The appraisal photo reappeared. So did the brunch pictures. The dots were no longer subtle. They formed a shape. Carmen saw the piece around midnight, when her notifications pinged more than usual. She didn't read it all the way through. She never did. Instead, she skimmed enough to know the damage was permanent. The next morning, Eli called Margot. Not accusatory, just tired. Would it kill you, he asked, to just let this go? Margot paused mid-fold, a stack of Hazel's laundry in her lap. Would it kill her to just apologize? She's not good at that. Then maybe she should stop giving people reasons to expect it. He sighed heavily. This is getting out of control. I think you've made your point. No, Margot said softly. I've made my peace. There's a difference. He didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. He just promised to talk to Carmen, which Margot suspected meant delay another fight. Later that afternoon, while flipping through documents in her study, she called Mr. Levin. I want to revise my will, she said plainly. Not everything, just the details. Mr. Levin didn't ask questions. After 40 years of handling her accounts, he understood the value of discretion. They worked through the changes methodically, removing Carmen from any default heir status, creating contingencies for slander or manipulation, and drafting a specific clause that tied inheritance to participation in family history preservation. When they were done, Margot felt no regret, just a settling, like a house shifting back into its foundation after a long storm. That evening, an email popped up in her inbox. The subject line was blank. Inside, a single sentence, if the necklace means that much, maybe I could have it back for Hazel's sake. Margot stared at the screen, lips pressed tight. She didn't respond right away. She simply walked to the jewelry cabinet, opened the drawer, and stared at the necklace now nestled between two velvet-lined boxes. Then she typed without emotion, "It's already been re-gifted." She clicked send. No signature. The block came quietly. No warning, no dramatic message, no final flare-up, just silence. Margot noticed it when she went to forward something Joanne had tagged her in, and Carmen's profile wouldn't load. User not found. She double-checked, clicked again. Still nothing. So this was how it would go now. Digital exile in pastel font. Margot didn't flinch. She simply closed the app, slid her phone onto the nightstand, and turned her focus to the living world. Hazel had begun coming over more often. At first it was under the usual pretense of staying out of the way, while her parents reorganized some vague shoot or went over content alignment. But by the third weekend in a row, Margot knew the truth. Hazel wasn't just escaping noise, she was seeking signal. The girl had questions, thoughtful ones. Why did great-grandma keep letters? Did people really fix things instead of replacing them? What made you start your business when you didn't have help? Margot never rushed the answers. She gave them room, like unpacking something fragile, one memory at a time, unwrapped with care. Sometimes they would sit together on the screened porch, iced tea sweating into glass, photos spread across the table like a timeline only they understood. Other nights, Hazel would curl up under the old quilt in the den, watching as Margot opened another box from the attic labeled in thick marker, "Family, Keep." One Sunday afternoon, after Hazel had gone home with a small tin of handwritten recipe cards, Margot called Mr. Levin again. "I want to create a new legal entity," she said, "something more structured than just a will." He didn't sound surprised. "What kind of structure?" "A trust," she said. "One that protects the assets I still have, but not just from taxes or fraud, from indifference, from neglect." There was a pause on the other end. Then Mr. Levin asked, "And the criteria?" "I want it tied to participation," she said, "in family history, in care, in intention, and Carmen, non-beneficiary," Margot said without a moment's hesitation. "I want that language exact." The documents were drafted by the end of the week. Margot signed each page carefully, initials neat, her signature bold, the kind that doesn't flinch anymore. Meanwhile, outside of her quiet household, Carmen's digital image had begun to curdle. The damage from the articles still lingered like smoke in the upholstery. PR managers were slow to return calls. One of her smaller partnerships quietly pulled a reshare. A style forum she used to moderate locked her thread, citing undisclosed provenance. No one called her out directly, but the air had shifted. And then the questions started showing up. "Where's the necklace now?" At first it was one or two comments, easily deleted, easily dismissed. but then they started appearing under old posts, on tagged photos. In replies from followers who had once adored her, Carmen turned off comment notifications, but they found their way back through hashtags and DMs. She couldn't filter fast enough. Eventually someone tagged Hazel. Hazel didn't post publicly, but later that night she uploaded a quiet story from her private account, visible only to her close friends list, which, whether intentionally or not, included one of the fashion bloggers who'd followed the saga from the beginning. The photo was soft and simple, a black velvet box, open, the necklace resting like a secret kept safe. Beside it, a handwritten note, just a few words in Margot's elegant script. Value is in the hands that remember. There was no caption, just a geotag. Austin, Texas. Within an hour, the story was screenshotted and circulating in legacy spaces again. Not with rage this time, with reverence. Margot didn't know about the post until Joanne called the next morning, her voice vibrating with something between glee and disbelief. She posted it, Margot. Hazel did. Not public, but enough people saw it. And they're reposting it like it's the antidote to influencer fatigue. Margot set down her coffee, heart ticking a little faster. Did she tag me? No. Just your handwriting. That evening, Hazel came back over. She didn't say anything about the story. She just walked into the kitchen, dropped her backpack on the floor, and pulled the tin of recipes from the counter. You wrote notes in the margins, she said, smiling, like little secrets. Margot looked at her and nodded. They weren't secrets. They were instructions. By the end of the month, the silence Carmen had once used as aesthetic was beginning to feel like a sentence. Her followers weren't gone, not entirely, but they had grown still. The familiar rhythm of dopamine-laced affirmation, the sea of hearts and praise and envy-tinged admiration, had thinned to a quiet, suspicious trickle. Likes trickled in slower. The word authentic began appearing more often, not as a compliment, but a question. The shift was subtle at first. One partnership email went to spam. A gifting opportunity was paused pending internal approvals. Then came the first formal drop, a mid-tier skincare brand. Carmen had promoted 5 times over the past year, quietly removed her from their ambassador list. No statement, just absence. Within 48 hours, 2 more brands followed suit. She didn't say anything publicly. She couldn't afford to, but inside the house, things grew sharp-edged. Eli heard her on calls, pacing, explaining, defending. It was a misunderstanding, she kept saying, her voice low and breathless. My MLL took something out of context. I didn't even keep the necklace. I thought she wanted it back. But what Carmen hadn't yet understood, what no algorithm could protect her from, was that her downfall didn't have a villain. It had a mirror. Across town, Margot was having tea with Hazel on the patio, when Joanne called with a voice full of ironic delight. You're not going to believe who just launched a Real Stories, Real Women campaign. Margot raised an eyebrow. Who? Margotden Pine, Joanne said. The one Carmen used to scoff at for being off-brand rustic. They just posted a promo video. Guess who's in? Margot said nothing, but Hazel, sitting cross-legged beside her, grinned without even looking up from the vintage photo album in her lap. The ad was small-scale, a regional campaign, just a few short clips, black and white transitions, classical music over soft narration. But in one of the frames, unmistakably, there was Margot, hands moving slowly over the velvet-lined drawers of her jewelry cabinet. In the next shot, Hazel holding the necklace up to the light with quiet wonder. No names, no backstory, just a tagline. Real legacy doesn't chase trends, it chooses them. Eli called that evening. He didn't sound angry anymore, just hollowed out. Can you stop now? He asked. Please. She's not okay. Margot, sitting at her desk, with a mug of chamomile and a newly organized folder labeled Hazel, trust documents, didn't hesitate. I already did, she said. The truth didn't. There was a long silence on the line. Then a tired sigh, one that sounded older than his 35 years. She posted a video, he said. Crying. Said people were attacking her. Said she's the victim of a coordinated jealousy campaign. Margot didn't look up. Did she say my name? No, then I'm still not involved. When she opened Instagram that night, purely out of curiosity, the video was already gone. Deleted. Archived. Maybe. Or buried beneath her grid. But the screenshots had already spread. A few followers shared clips with captions like, "This isn't accountability. It's a tantrum. And if the necklace wasn't important, why all the drama?" Joanne texted again, this time with a screen grab of Carmen mid-cry, tears carefully staged, but mascara slightly smudged. "She thought you were quiet," Joanne wrote. "You were just archived." The next morning, a white floral arrangement arrived at Margot's doorstep. No card, no note. The petals were too perfect, the bouquet too symmetrical. Carmen's style, every angle manufactured for visual consumption. Margot stared at it for a moment, then carried it to the outdoor bin, lifted the lid, and dropped it in with the same care she used to fold napkins. Not angry, just dumb. She stepped back inside, closed the door, and returned to the table where Hazel was now carefully arranging old letters into chronological stacks. "Did she really write these in fountain pen?" Hazel asked, holding one gently by the corners. "Every single one," Margot said. She believed permanence came from effort. Hazel nodded thoughtfully, then returned to her sorting. It was a slow Sunday afternoon, the kind where light pours in through the windows at just the right angle to make everything feel honest. Hazel had been sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, flipping through a binder Margot had pulled from the cedar chest. The pages were thick with time, birth certificates, school photos, old Christmas lists, written in crayon, all catalogued with the same care Margot used when preserving anything that had mattered once and might matter again. "I think Dad drew this when he was 5, Hazel said, holding up a stick figure family scrawled in blue marker. 2 parents, 1 small boy and what looked like a dog with antennae. Margot smiled without looking up from her knitting. "He said that was his alien dog, named it Ralph. Wanted to adopt one after seeing E.T. Hazel giggled and returned the drawing to its sleeve. She reached for her phone to snap a picture for safekeeping and accidentally opened her email app. And that's when she saw a shared cloud folder, still linked from Carmen's old family marketing deck. She clicked out of reflex, expecting content calendars and outfit tags. What she found instead stopped her cold. Inside the folder were dozens of unpublished drafts, captions, scripts, and bullet points for future posts. Some were half-written ideas for sponsored reels. Others were longer monologues Carmen had planned to deliver on camera. They weren't public, but they were revealing. Hazel read through one with her lips pressed tight. "I was raised by women who couldn't afford style, so I built my own." Another. "My daughter won't inherit dusty old trinkets. She'll inherit clarity." Hazel felt her chest tighten. She read one more. A caption Carmen had apparently written for the birthday post she never published. "Heirlooms are beautiful, but not all of us were lucky enough to be handed something worth keeping." Hazel swallowed hard. Her cheeks flushed with a complicated mix of embarrassment, betrayal, and something colder she didn't have a name for yet. She stood, crossed the room slowly, and handed the phone to Margot. Margot didn't ask what it was. She just read. Quietly. Once. Then again, slower. Her hand didn't shake, but Hazel could see the shift in her posture. A subtle hardening, like shutters closing before a storm. She took the phone, forwarded the files to herself, and sent them directly to Mr. Levin, with a short note. "Need to file under reputation preservation, potential defamation pattern emerging. Archive with other trust clauses." That evening, Joanne came over, casserole dish in hand, and indignation already simmering beneath the surface. "She's writing fiction now?" she asked after reading one of the drafts. "Raised by women who couldn't afford style? I saw your mother's wardrobe. That woman could make a burlap sack look like Chanel." Margot sat at the table, flipping through a small linen-bound notebook, where she'd begun drafting her own reflections. Not for sharing, necessarily, but for clarity. "I don't care if she calls me outdated," she said softly. "But erasing the people who carried her here, that's where I draw the line." Joanne nodded slowly, setting down her glass. "So what now?" Margot tapped her pen once against the paper. I'm going to make sure the truth doesn't get deleted just because her narrative shifted. Together they drafted a short but powerful statement, not an attack, but a reminder. Margot posted it to the Vintage Collectors group and later repurposed it for her own small community page. Stories don't start when the camera rolls. They begin in silence, around kitchen tables, inside old jewelry boxes, in margins of cookbooks where love was written in shorthand. Legacy isn't something you brand, it's something you honor. The post was reshared more than anything she'd ever written. Carmen saw it within hours, and this time she did respond with a legal threat, a cease and desist sent via email by someone calling themselves a reputation management liaison. Margot read it once, then flagged it, forwarded it to Miss Levin, and returned to planning a charity jewelry event she'd quietly been organizing with Hazel. 2 weeks later, in the sun-drenched rec hall of a local historical society, Margot stood beside her granddaughter at a velvet-covered table. The necklace lay center stage, not for sale, not for spectacle, but as part of a storyboard titled, "The Women Who Wore It First." Hazel gave a brief talk about memory, craftsmanship, and what it means to know where something came from. Her voice trembled at first, but Margot stood just behind her, hands folded, her presence steady. The first video was short, just 27 seconds. A side-by-side split screen. On the left, Carmen at a past brand event, posing in an embellished blazer, holding a cocktail glass with manicured precision. On the right, a screenshot of Margot's vintage collector post, the tourmaline necklace, resting on soft linen, next to her handwritten words, "Some things carry stories you can't tag." The reel used no music, just ambient background noise, footsteps, distant chatter, the sound of silverware, as captions rolled over the video. One woman inherited image, the other inherited meaning. One went viral, the other made a legacy. By the next morning, the clip had 18,000 shares on TikTok and was reposted by a mid-sized content creator who specialized in quiet anti-influencing. The trend snowballed. More reels surfaced. People combed through Carmen's old posts, pairing her most performative captions with bits of Margot's now circulating wisdom. One video cut from Carmen saying, "Aesthetic is everything," to Hazel speaking at the jewelry event, "Craftsmanship is time made visible." Margot didn't seek it out, but Joanne did, and kept Margot updated like a war correspondent with Wi-Fi. "They're calling you the matriarch of nuance," Joanne said, laughing as she scrolled. "Apparently that's a thing now." Margot was sitting on her back patio, Hazel beside her, quietly sorting through a stack of handwritten letters from her great-grandmother's recipe box. She didn't respond to Joanne's report, just ran her thumb along the fold of a lemon bar recipe, written in perfect slanting cursive. Later that week, a producer from a Generational Culture podcast reached out. The host, a woman in her 40s with a degree in cultural anthropology and a deep love for regional storytelling, invited Margot and Hazel to speak on an upcoming episode titled, "When Legacy Speaks Louder Than Likes." Margot hesitated. She wasn't a performer, but Hazel had a way of softening her resistance. "It's not about being on camera," Hazel said gently. "It's about giving the story back its shape." So they said yes. The interview was recorded in a cozy local studio. Hazel answered questions with thoughtful grace, speaking about the necklace not as a scandal but as an anchor, something that helped her understand where she came from. Margot, for her part, stayed measured, direct, never petty. "I don't believe in revenge," she said calmly. "I believe in records. Some things are just correction." The podcast went live that Friday and hit 250,000 downloads within 72 hours. Across town, Carmen watched her phone like it was an enemy. The spotlight, once warm and flattering, now felt surgical. Brands were no longer emailing. Collaborations were under strategic review. The inbox that once overflowed with praise now echoed with polite avoidance. That Sunday, she went live on Instagram for the first time in weeks. Her voice trembled, not with vulnerability but with strain. "I know there's been noise lately," she began, eyes blinking wide, face clean of makeup. but sometimes people just don't like seeing women succeed. They call it fake because they don't understand how hard we work to stay composed. She paused for effect, but the comments section remained off. They say I faked stories. I didn't, I shaped them. That's what storytellers do. It might have landed differently, if not for what happened next. No one knew who posted a clip of Carmen's live alongside the now infamous audio, recorded months ago of her birthday night whisper, "Her gifts are always so cheap." The video matched her words with the appraisal receipt. Then cut to Hazel quietly saying on the podcast, "Truth doesn't need to go viral, it just needs to stay intact." The internet devoured it. That evening, Eli called. His voice was softer than Margot remembered. No defensiveness, just fatigue. "I think she's breaking," he said. Margot was silent a moment, then answered, "She's not breaking, she's being revealed." There was no satisfaction in her tone, no triumph, just truth spoken plainly, the way her generation had always believed it ought to be. Later, after the dishes had been put away and the porch lights flicked off, Hazel sat cross-legged on the rug again, watching one of the videos that compared Carmen's aesthetic with Margot's steady presence. "I feel kind of bad," she said. "Even though, I know you didn't destroy her." Margot looked at her granddaughter, steady, thoughtful, becoming the woman her mother never made room for, and said gently, "That's because I didn't." Hazel nodded. "You didn't destroy her," she said again. "She exposed herself." It was quiet when they opened the cabinet. Not ceremoniously, no speech, no fanfare, just the sound of Margot's key slipping into the old brass lock, with the precision of someone who'd used it for decades. The cabinet was built from cherry wood, hand-joined by her father he'd meant it for tools, but Margot had inherited it instead, and filled it with a different kind of utility: documents, photographs, mementos, all filed, not by tax code or chronology, but by memory. She stepped back and let Hazel peer in. The girl's expression didn't shift with awe or excitement, just focus. A kind of quiet knowing, as if she understood, instinctively, that the contents weren't valuable in the modern sense, not monetized, not clickable, but sacred all the same. "There's no rush," Margot said gently. "We'll go through it together." Over the next few hours they cataloged it piece by piece. Hazel handled everything with care, slipping each birth certificate and faded black and white photo into protective sleeves, labeling folders in her neat, round handwriting. Margot watched from the armchair, occasionally offering context, a name, a year, a story tied to a letter folded so many times it held creases like scars. By late afternoon, they had the beginnings of what Hazel called the legacy binder. 3 inches thick, color-coded and filled with scanned heirlooms, copied recipes, family trees and notes in both their hands. "You know," Hazel said, tapping her pen, "this could be a website." Margot raised an eyebrow. "A blog, maybe. Nothing flashy. Just stories, real ones, with pictures. Stuff people can actually learn from." It wasn't something Margot had considered, but as the suggestion settled in the room like dusk, it didn't feel absurd. It felt possible. Joanne stopped by with iced tea and saw the binder splayed open on the dining table. "Well, damn," she said, peering down at the organized chaos. "I haven't seen a paper trail this meaningful since my divorce." Hazel laughed. "You ever think about putting this online?" Joanne added. "Could be the only corner of the internet that actually adds value." Margot just smiled. "We'll think about it." 2 days later, Mr. Levin arrived with a folder of papers freshly notarized. "All the revisions are in," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. "The trust now includes a provision for the legacy archive. Any documented slander, defamation, or public misrepresentation of the family history results in immediate forfeiture of rights and assets. No appeals." Hazel sat nearby, watching him like a courtroom drama come to life. Mr. Levin closed the folder, looked at Margot, and gave a small, firm nod. "It's airtight." Margot returned the nod. "Good. I'm tired of things being loose." That evening, the doorbell rang just after sunset. Eli stood on the porch, not holding flowers or gifts, just his car keys and a folded piece of paper. He looked older than he had a month ago. The same man, but weathered. like someone who had finally stopped trying to pretend peace could be achieved through silence. "I wanted to come alone," he said. "Just to talk." Margot didn't invite him in right away. She stepped outside, onto the porch, and closed the door gently behind her. The porch light cast a soft amber glow across the wood planks, dust motes floating in the air like thoughts not yet spoken. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not just for her. For me, for not seeing it." Margot folded her arms, not cold, just grounding herself. "You saw it," she said. "You just didn't want to pick a side. I thought being neutral meant keeping things together." "It doesn't," she said softly. "It just means no one knows where you stand." He looked down, jaw tightening. "I don't know where I belong in all this anymore." Margot didn't flinch. She looked at him, really looked, and answered without cruelty. "You can stay in the family," she said. "But she's already left it." They stood there in the quiet a while longer. No need to fill the space. The truth had already arrived before he did. The subject line was blank. The email itself arrived in Margot's inbox just after sunrise, time-stamped 5:17 a.m., the hour when guilt often masquerades as vulnerability. No greeting. No apology, just 3 short paragraphs of shapeless, meandering thought. Carmen's tone was familiar, part wounded, part performative, as if writing for an audience she still believed was watching. "I know things got taken out of context. You've always had your way of remembering things. None of this was meant to hurt you. I was just trying to build something from nothing." There was no mention of the necklace. No acknowledgement of the lies, just a vague, trembling suggestion that the past had been misunderstood, and perhaps shouldn't be held against her. Margot read it once, then again, slower. She didn't feel anger. Not even disappointment. Only confirmation. She opened a new message, typed 7 words and pressed send. The gift was kindness. You returned it unopened. No salutation, no punctuation beyond the period. She closed her laptop and poured herself a second cup of coffee. Across town, Mr. Levin arrived mid-morning with the final documents in a slim black folder. The trust was now irrevocable. Every clause sealed. Every contingency handled. Carmen's name no longer appeared anywhere except in the section labeled Removed Beneficiaries, Cause Breach of Stewardship. "It's done," he said, adjusting his tie. "The structure will hold." "Thank you," Margot said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm done holding it myself." That afternoon, Hazel stood at the front of her English class, fidgeting slightly as she loaded her slideshow. Her presentation was titled, "Stories We Inherit, Memory, Objects, and the Weight of What's Passed Down." She began with a photograph of her great-grandmother's necklace, then moved through images of heirlooms, a recipe card, a letter signed in ink, a pair of cufflinks. The room was still as she spoke, not because her voice was loud, but because it didn't need to be. "My grandmother told me," she said, "that legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you participate in. If you abandon it, it doesn't follow you. If you hold it, it shapes you." After class, her teacher asked for a copy to include in the school's end-of-year archive. Joanne came over that evening with a surprise. "I figured it shouldn't stay in a drawer," she said, pulling a flat, square parcel from her tote bag. Inside was a custom frame, thick matte border, archival glass, centered inside, preserved against linen paper, was the original receipt for the necklace. Beneath it, in gold calligraphy, were the words, "Not cheap, chosen." Margot laughed softly, a real laugh, from somewhere deep. "I thought you'd like that," Joanne said. "That's my legacy, irreverence and accuracy." Margot placed the frame on the hallway wall, just above the antique console table, beside a photo of her mother at 24. A quiet gallery of permanence. The next morning, Hazel found a small padded envelope on her dresser. Inside was a sealed letter and a trifold folder labeled in Margot's handwriting, "Necklace Full Provenance." She opened the note first. "Sweetheart, this isn't just for your records, it's for your spine. Legacy gets lighter when you carry it with clarity. You've earned that now, with love, always." Hazel didn't cry. She just sat on the edge of her bed for a while, holding the envelope in her lap, her fingers curled gently around its weight. She didn't have to ask what came next. She already knew. Later that week, Margot hosted a quiet dinner, just Joanne, Mr. Levin and Hazel. After dessert, Joanne leaned back and raised her glass. To surviving the storm. Margot lifted hers in reply. To knowing it wasn't weather. It was warning. Hazel looked from one woman to the other, then down at the binder in her lap. Her own name, written in neat pen on the tab marked next. The invitation went out quietly. No hashtags, no RSVP tracker, no styled photos of place settings in advance. Just a handful of handwritten cards slipped into mailboxes and messengered to inboxes with a subject line that read, "Brunch. If you still believe in real things." Margot set the table with her mother's china. Hazel arranged a cluster of dahlias and peonies in milk glass vases they found in the attic. Joanne brought place cards written in gold gel pen, each with a name and a single word underneath: witness, thread, keeper, return. The guests began arriving just after 10, a dozen in total. Some were old family friends. Others were vintage collectors from Margot's group, and a few, quietly and without ceremony, were local influencers, ones who'd once followed Carmen, and now followed something slower, something steadier. Nobody mentioned Carmen. They didn't need to. The story had already done its telling. Joanne floated from room to room, topping off mimosas and whispering jokes into the corners of conversations. Hazel guided a few guests through the memory wall, photos and heirlooms curated with care, each item labeled with a story, not a price. In the kitchen, Eli stood beside the coffee urn, quietly refilling cups. He didn't speak much, but when Margot caught his eye from across the room, he nodded, the kind of nod that asks for nothing but means everything. Midway through the second course, Margot She didn't tap a glass or call for silence. She simply rose, napkin folded neatly beside her plate, and lifted a handwritten toast she'd kept tucked in her apron pocket. "Some gifts," she said, her voice clear and calm, "don't come wrapped. They don't shimmer. They don't Some arrive as stillness, as survival, as clarity." She looked around the table, letting the silence settle with purpose. They aren't always welcomed, but they are always earned. Hazel reached beneath the table and retrieved a small box, wrapped in plum velvet ribbon. She stood, crossed the room and handed it to her grandmother without a word. Margot opened it slowly. Inside was a new jewelry box, pale oak with brass hinges, lined in navy velvet. On the underside of the lid, engraved in Hazel's own handwriting, were the words, "What's remembered becomes real." Margot traced the lettering with her finger, her eyes soft. "I thought you might need a new one," Hazel said quietly. "For the next chapter." Joanne raised her glass. "From petty to powerful," she said, with a grin that held both pride and mischief. "Cheers to that." Laughter rippled around the table. Low, warm, unforced. It was the kind of sound that had been missing for a long time. Not performance, just presence. After the guests drifted out and the dishes were stacked in the sink, Eli lingered. He moved through the dining room without instruction, collecting glasses, folding napkins, wiping the faint rings left behind by too sweet punch. Margot watched him from the doorway for a moment, then stepped beside him and handed over the dish towel. "You know," she said, "she wasn't always this brittle." Eli looked up, his expression cautious. "I used to wonder," Margot continued, "if maybe I'd done something wrong, if maybe the necklace was too much, or not enough. But now I think, maybe it just showed her something she couldn't hold." Eli nodded, silent. "She wasn't given less," Margot said. "She just treated it like less." As they cleared the last of the platters, Margot noticed a folded napkin left on one of the side tables. Inside, someone had scribbled a message in ink. "We came for the story. We stayed for the truth." Margot didn't recognize the handwriting, but it didn't matter. The message was enough. She folded it neatly, tucked it into the back of her legacy binder, and turned to Hazel, who was now flipping through a book of antique signatures in the den. "Did you mean it?" Margot asked. About the next chapter, Hazel looked up. Her expression was no longer that of a girl peeking into history, but a young woman beginning to shape it. I already started writing it, she said. The binder had grown heavy, not just with pages, but with care. Hazel flipped through it slowly one Saturday morning, seated at Margot's dining table, a cinnamon scone half finished beside her tea. The pages whispered as she turned them. A scanned birth record here, a recipe annotated in the margin there. Names that had once belonged only to memory were now organized, labeled, preserved. At the end, tucked into a sleeve marked simply verification, Hazel found a fresh envelope, cream-colored, unsealed. She slid out the paper inside, the original receipt. The necklace's date of purchase, the boutique's name, the amount higher than Carmen had ever guessed. Margot's handwritten note clipped to the corner. Truth isn't loud, it's exact. MD Hazel placed it carefully back in the sleeve, then stood and walked to Margot, who was sitting on the porch mending a tear in a linen napkin. I added the receipt to the binder, Hazel said. Margot didn't look up. It was always meant to be yours. Hazel hesitated. Then, thank you for keeping the truth, Grandma. Now Margot looked up, not dramatically, but fully. It was never hard to keep, she said, only hard to watch people discard. 2 days later, they visited the bank together. Margot had called ahead, arranged everything. The safety deposit box was clean, cool, and sat at the back of the vault, like a secret kept long past its usefulness, but still alive. Hazel placed the necklace inside the velvet pouch. Margot added the signed documentation. The box was registered under both of their names. No cameras, no captions, just permanence. On the way home, Hazel watched raindrops smear against the window in thin, glistening streaks. It feels safer now, she said, like she can't touch it anymore. She never could, Margot replied. She only thought she had the hands for it. By the following month, Carmen's profile had thinned into stillness. The once daily outfit reels, skincare tutorials, and filtered family brunches had been replaced with generic reposts and intermittent silence. One brand quietly erased their partnership highlight. A second unfollowed her altogether. Her stories no longer drew comment. She was still online technically, but untagged, unshared, unrecalled. Joanne called it influencer purgatory. Apparently she's thinking of rebranding, Joanne said one evening. Now she wants to talk about boundaries and betrayal. Margot smirked but didn't respond. She was too busy typing. At her desk, she'd begun drafting a new piece. Not a call-out, not even a defense. Just something that had been sitting in her ribs for a while now. Valuable, not always visible. It was quiet, lyrical. Only a few paragraphs. She posted it on the same community forum where her legacy story had quietly started. Some things don't ask for attention. They wait, they outlast trends. They live in bottom drawers and bent photo corners. They speak in handwriting and patience. Value is rarely loud, but it never forgets who listened. The post was shared. Once again, not widely, but deeply. 3 weeks later, Hazel graduated. The ceremony was held outside, under white canvas tents, with chairs arranged in rows across the freshly cut lawn. Margot sat near the front, wearing a navy dress and a wide-brimmed straw hat. Joanne was beside her, already misty-eyed before they'd even called names. When Hazel walked across the stage, the necklace sat just above her collarbone. She didn't touch it, didn't adjust it, just let it rest. Later during photos, one of her classmates complimented it. Vintage? She asked. Hazel smiled. No, it's inherited. The sun dipped a little lower. The crowd thinned, and Margot stood back, watching her granddaughter speak softly with teachers, pose for friends, slip the diploma folder carefully into her tote. She looked like every woman in Margot's family, and none of them. She was hers, but also her own. Back at the house, Margot took the final envelope, one she'd labeled simply after, and slid it into the back of the binder. Inside was one line, handwritten on a single sheet of linen paper. They mocked the gift. I left them the receipt and a story that'll outlive the feed.